Hello everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Electricity Association's Conversation webinar series. The CEA is the voice of the electricity industry in Canada. My name is Farhan Mirza, and I'm pleased to be your host for today's webinar. The Conversation series features presentations from CEA's corporate partners, and the series will highlight a variety of Canadian and international solutions to the current and future challenges faced by the industry. Working with CEA's corporate partners, these webinars have been developed to be of specific interest to those working in the electricity utility space from generation through to the customer. For a list of upcoming sessions, check out CEA's website at www.electricity.ca. Just before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to mention. Our session today is scheduled to run from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Questions can be asked, and we would encourage you to do so as they come to mind by typing them into the chat function. They will be asked at the end of the presentation. A brief survey will be sent to webinar participants following the session today. I very much appreciate your candid feedback and are interested in any topics that you would like to have included in the conversation series. Please also keep an eye out for future webinars and events through CEA's monthly newsletter, Current Affairs. With over 6,000 subscribers, Current Affairs is the place to go for Canadian industry news as we connect the national value chain from generation through to the customer. If you'd like to receive Current Affairs, you can subscribe to this free publication via CEA's website at www.electricity.ca. Today, ComplyTech will be presenting our webinar on rethinking run until failure in OT environments. As security experts, we are used to being called into action when a breach is already underway, much like a firefighter being called into a fire when structure is already fully engulfed in flames. This is not the optimal way to maintain the operations and security of an industrial environment. A more optimal response and significant cost savings, however, could be achieved by proactively performing OT cyber maintenance before the cyber attack is underway. Just as we perform routine lubrication and maintenance on machinery in our production environments, performing cyber maintenance can yield significant security and maintenance benefits in the OT environment rather than a running on failure. This session will discuss 3 key activities that you should be doing in your OT environment to ensure that the systems within will remain reliable, secured, and fully maintained to address the security and operations tasks required both now and into the future. Joining us today is Vid Kardavikius, President of ComplyTech, to introduce today's speaker. Vid, welcome.
Great, thank you very much, Farhan. And good morning to everyone. As Farhan mentioned, my name is Vid Kardavikius, and I am the president of ComplyTech, and we are proud new corporate partners with the Canadian Electric Association. At ComplyTech, we have consultants who provide IT security and NERC compliance management solutions to the North American utility sector. We hope that our association with the CEA will help provide knowledge and education on these topics. When the CEA invited us to host a webinar, we wanted to bring relevant content to the Canadian utility members. We immediately thought of Marty Edwards, who is the Vice President of Operational Technology with our corporate partner Tenable. The reason is because he is an expert in operational technology and industrial control systems, and he also served as the director of ICS at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for many years. Thank you, Marty, for taking the time to do this presentation for us. And now I'm going to pass it over to Marty.
Thank you, Vid, and good day to everybody. Hello. I hope everybody's having a good day so far. As Vid talked about, I have a fairly diverse or interesting background. What he didn't talk about is the fact that I grew up in British Columbia, so I always like doing events for my Canadian colleagues, and I actually happen to be in BC right now, so timing is great. Most of my career was spent about 50-50, I guess, in actual operational technology or industrial control system environments. I'm a BCIT alum, and my training was specifically in automation and process control. So I spent some time in mainly in pulp and paper and specialty chemical in Western Canada and then the northwest of the U.S. And then moved on to cybersecurity or critical infrastructure security in the early to mid 2000s. And as Vid said, worked for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as the director of the Industrial Control Systems CERT. So work fairly closely still with DHS and with Public Safety Canada and other entities on both sides of the border. So what I wanted to talk about today is a concept that I've been kicking around for a while. And that's that, people tend to go off and purchase their OT environments or their controls environments or protective relaying environments, whether it's on the generation side, whether it's in transmission or distribution, they buy all this sort of cyber-enabled stuff. And it tends to be a capital expenditure, right? You buy it, you install it, you forget about it, and you don't touch it unless it breaks. And I experienced some of that fairly significantly, back in the day. I remember we had fairly legacy, I guess, equipment that was sort of mainframe mini computer based. And it wouldn't be it wouldn't be out of the realm of the possible to pay something like $250,000 for one sort of pane of glass, one monitor, one screen in the control room, right? Because you had a specialized video display unit, you had all the custom cabling and everything that went back to a VAX or an HP mini computer. And this was sort of 90s type technology. I remember when we first installed, Windows NT type of technology, and we kind of drove that cost down to about $2,500 per pane of glass. And I remember being very excited about this from a program management perspective, and we did that in a number of installations. And I remember very distinctly, after those systems had been in place a couple of years, I went back to management and I said, hey, I need to update or replace these computers because I need to update to the newest version of the software, new operating system, new version of the software. And I said, so I need, X tens of thousands of dollars. And they looked at me and they said, you realize that, you haven't depreciated any of that asset yet. So you're asking us to basically write off an asset that has 20 years of depreciation on it. You have 17 years left of depreciation left on this asset. Why are you replacing it already? And that's kind of when we needed to switch from this, sort of capital expenditure CapEx environment into more of an OpEx or operating expenditure environment. And I don't think we're still there from a maintenance perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these environments, some corollaries that I have in how we treat them vis-a-vis sort of maintenance practices. And full disclosure, I am not a preventative maintenance expert, right? There are people who are trained and have degrees, specifically in preventative maintenance. That's not me. I borrow some of the concepts, and I've worked around operational environments long enough to understand, but I'm by no means of an expert, and happy to take this to Q&A at the end. So type your questions in, hold them, or type them in, and we'll try to address as many as we can at the end of this session. So if you look at your industrial control system environment, your operational technology environment in terms of risk, right? My belief is that we, tend in the information security community to spend a lot of money in the IT environment, right? But not so much in the OT or ICS, industrial environments. And I just think that's upside down, because I actually think if you lose the capability to operate your facility, so if it's a generation facility, in one plant, or if it's, a transmission line, you lose the ability to reclose or to do any switching in that environment. I mean, those are significant events, right? Those are high risk business critical events. So why don't we treat them like that? It's really weird to me that in some of these assets that are absolutely in the highest risk environments that we kind of push to the side, things like updating, the software. We just want to leave it the way it is, and that can be okay for a while, but eventually, it degrades, right? I mean, those installations do degrade, and it takes a lot of effort to heal them, right? If there's some sort of incident or event that happens. So let's look at the different sort of maintenance ideas. So, uh, the easiest form, I guess maybe easiest isn't the right word, but the far left of the curve is where you basically don't maintain anything. You react. So when it breaks, you go off and fix it. And so you have a motor, and when it burns out, or you have a winding problem or something like that, you go and you replace it. At the other end of the spectrum is where you get into, proactive and predictive maintenance strategies, where you're actively trying to capture data about how that environment is running. You're analyzing that data and predicting or forecasting, when something's going to fail. So, in the generation area, turbine control, etc. I mean, the manufacturers of these, like large combined cycle gas turbine kind of installations, they do a ton of that, right? I mean, they quite often have um, connections into your systems to be able to pull that data out and analyze it and tell you, hey, we can tweak the efficiency here, or oh, this outboard bearing is going to be a problem, and so the next time we have an opportunity, we need to do some turnaround there. So we really try to forecast that, and I think that technologies in cybersecurity have matured to the point where we should be applying similar types of concepts in our cybersecurity area. So let's look a little bit more at kind of the run to failure. These are extreme examples, but waiting for something to break, and waiting for something to break in your control systems environment um, is not great. As a guy who I carried, the big walkie-talkie two-way radio, I carried pagers, I carried the very first cell phones, I had cell phone cradles that clunked into your truck, your pickup truck, and I mean, so I've had every kind of electronic thing wired to me so I was on call, right? A lot of my career. I can tell you that those calls at 2:30 in the morning when something is down because of a control system failure, software, hardware, security, what have you, those are not very fun, right? Those are the best way I've seen it described is it's stressful and costly maintenance, right? So these are events that burn your people out, right? These are events that cost you a lot of money, and so people get, I think, into a false sense of security where they think, oh well, I'll just fix it when it breaks. That'll be the lowest cost. It's like, well, working for an automation vendor where we had failures, for example, where we had to fly things like an industrial control valve. We had to charter a plane to fly the valve to get it to the customer site. Those are expensive, right? You pay extra to do that. The other thing about run to failure is that it's not good at handling common mode failures. So if you have something defective in the product, or you have something where you're going to have an electricity surge or something that takes out a whole bank of motors or pumps or electrical equipment, run to failure is not a very good way to try to address those kinds of things. You really can run into challenges. So what's this look like from a cybersecurity perspective, right? So if I look at run to failure, the best example I come up with right now is ransomware, right? So we've had a lot of different examples of ransomware around the globe. You know, we've got examples like Norsk Hydro, the aluminum manufacturer here. We have examples like Maersk, the global shipping company. And I can tell you that waiting until your industrial control system is impacted and no longer available because of a ransomware event that's locking you out, uh, that's not going to be a good day, right? So wouldn't it be better to try to address these things proactively up front? And I believe investing in the expenditure, the operational expenditures to do this. And you know, we're talking about people and process and technology, right? It's not just about buying the box with the blinky lights. You know, you need to program those things into your budgets, and in some cases I think it actually belongs in the maintenance budget, right? I mean, it is something that you are maintaining the uh, integrity of the environment, right? And in today's converged IT and OT environments, you know, I don't think you can get away from this, right? It's people still will claim, quote unquote, that they have an air gap between their operational environment and their business environment or the internet. And I'm here to say that in 90% of those cases, the air gap doesn't exist. Somebody is carrying removable media, you know, CD-ROM, USB stick. They're moving data in and out of those environments somehow. There's dial-up modems still in existence in some places, right? So you know, you have these connections into these systems, and you know, malware is going to find a way into your systems, and so you should be preparing yourself for that event. You know, um, so taking some of these examples in the sort of maintenance regimes and applying them, you know, you don't have to just do run to failure, right? You can do things like checking the lubrication oil, right? So, you know, you can do schedule based. It's kind of like your car, right? I mean, you can take your car and you know, most people don't just run it until it breaks and then go, oh yeah, I guess I should have changed the oil, right? They look in the book and it says, oh, every 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles, you know, I should be changing the oil in my car. And so you do. You take it into the quickie lube or whatever and get it changed. And that's a very rigorous schedule based. I mean, you don't know if the oil is actually worn out or, you know, you've sort of devalued, degraded its lubrication properties, but you do it anyway because that's the right thing to do. You know, and you can do things like that. I mean, you can take and say, okay, well, every time we're going to do a downtime, and this is a 1 year maintenance window, you know, we're going to do these specific patches, or we're going to test this hardware here and make sure the firmware on these cards is up to the latest version. I mean, you can do those in the cybersecurity area. Or you can start to try to predict based on some you know, insight, right? Take some measurements and then come back and try to take that data and analyze that data. So if you look at, you know, kind of this schedule-based, you know, preventative maintenance concept in cybersecurity, I kind of liken that or correlate it to, you know, a risk-based assessment report, right? You take, you pay a consultant a whole bunch of money, or you have an internal audit team that goes out and you, on a yearly basis or on some sort of periodic basis, go out and evaluate the system, right? So you take a tool like Tenable's Nessus and you go and look at all these devices and you go, okay, I found all these devices on my network. Here's the patch level that they're at. Here's the software that they're running. And oh, by the way, there's some outdated software on these human machine interfaces. But, you know, then it gets kind of bound into a book and put on the shelf, and it may or may not see the light of day. So you know, to me, that's kind of compliance, right? So, you know, the Vid, you know, kind of talked about some of their NERC compliance things, and you know, you certainly do have to meet those regulations and comply with them, I believe it's not enough, right? You have to go beyond just compliance and get into a proactive mode, because the compliance rules or regulations are always going to lag so far behind what most people would say is good security concepts, right? So you're better off to do more in those cases. So let's look at what this kind of looks like in the cybersecurity space. How do I move from that run to failure sort of mode into this proactive mode? And with I'm trying to make this as light on product pitch as possible. But in the Tenable world, our Tenable OT product, I think there's three key differentiators there. And I think that you can use a variety of products to do that, but I think that we're the only ones that roll all of this kind of together in a converged IT/OT area. So the first one is that you want to be able to see, right? It really boggles my mind how many incident responses that I read about or hear about where something happens, they're going to go fix it, right? So they're using kind of the run to failure capability or methodology, but then they say, well, we don't know what's on our networks. We actually don't even know where our networks are. So there's probably some OT or protection engineer who knows about that one network, but can you really wrap your arms around all of it? I mean, do you have a detailed network diagram, and do you know what assets are connected to these networks, and do you know what firmware they're running and what state they're in, and all of the different vendors, and just having a good inventory of all of that is critical. It's going to be just critical to being able to respond correctly. Sort of the next level up is, once you've got an understanding of all those devices, are you monitoring your networks in a real-time basis, for whether it's policy violations, whether there are anomalies, like, oh, wow, we see that this network was, at this level of data transmission, and all of a sudden we see that there's a lot more data that's going through this egress point. So is somebody pulling out, data, exfiltrating data from your networks, or do you have signature hits on malicious malware on these networks? And then the next thing is to take that monitoring and monitor actually the devices themselves, right? So is your programmable logic controller, is somebody making logic changes to that? And okay, well, if they are making changes, then you can start to, cross-reference that or correlate that with, is this an authorized change by an authorized user from an authorized workstation on the network? Or is it a rogue laptop somebody plugged in and made a change, kind of off shift or in off hours? Or was this sort of malware that made this change, and did it come from some compromised host somewhere in the system? And these things, I think, are all definitely things that you should be thinking about and moving towards, right? So in the first one, where we're trying to see what's going on inside of these types of devices, I liken that to kind of thermal imaging, right? We've used FLIR, forward-looking infrared, for a long time, right? So I remember packing around, a $50,000+ camera in the 90s, to take images of switch gear and that, to see where you had hot bus bars and things like that. So in this picture, you've got a motor and a pump coupled there, and in the red and the white is the windings in the motor, right? So you've got some hot spots in this motor. And how do we predict, that there's going to be a failure? So in this particular case, it was a cooling fan that had cracked or failed. And so now, before the motor pump system fails, we can actually schedule it, and we can say, okay, we need to get the right parts in, we need to be able to schedule this maintenance, and make it so that a failure of this device isn't going to take you offline. It's not going to cause you an outage, right? It's not going to cause you a production outage. It's actually going to be addressed during a routine maintenance window. We should be able to do the same thing with our devices, right? And so we actually we can go to with Tenable OT, we of course passively listen to the network, but we also have a capability that we call active device query. So this one is where if you have a Siemens or a Schneider or a Rockwell or any one of these other major manufacturers, we communicate with those devices using their own native language and own native protocols. So this isn't scanning, right? We're not scanning the entire OT network, kind of banging on these devices saying, who are you? We are listening to the network. We're determining what kinds of devices you have on the network. And then we are very surgically sending a message to them going, oh, we think that you're a Siemens S7 controller. Can you please tell us, more about yourself? And the controller will say, oh yes, I am running this version of software, and I have, these attributes, and my key switch is in run or mode or in program mode. And so we can get a lot of details about what's going on inside of that device, far more details than you can get if you're simply passively listening. A lot of these devices in the OT space, they don't talk unless they're talked to, and so you can miss a lot. So we believe we have a very high level of coverage, and that our data is extremely accurate, right? We have very accurate and granular data that can come out of these devices. So to me, that's kind of like seeing inside the device. So first and foremost, inventory, asset inventory. The next piece that we want to look at is wrapping your arms around all this sort of preventative maintenance data, right? So you're doing lubrication oil testing, you're doing vibration analysis, and you have these sensors sending data to you. You have to analyze it, right? So you put all this into a big data lake, and you have some people that are paid to go through and analyze that. And it could be the vendors themselves, right? In the case of like the turbine examples I gave before. When the security world, it's not much different, right? So you've got log data, you've got SIM data, you've got all of this data that's coming in, and in our system, it's no different. You're having this network threat monitoring type of environment where we're looking at all this network traffic, and we're providing ways for you to analyze it. It's really critical, I think, to tune those systems, right? And to it's kind of like when we used to do big startups. You'd go and start up a distributed control system in a power plant or a pulp mill. Thousands of alarms would be coming in, every hour, and the operators would be very disturbed by how many times they had to push the acknowledge alarm or silence alarm button. And so we spent a lot of time with a big printout and a red line or a pencil going through every one to tune just what was necessary for the operators to do their job. And it's no different in security. So you really need to take a look at ingesting all that data, but you really have to lower your false positive rate. You really have to tune that for what's important to you, right? And we pride ourselves at Tenable on making sure that the data that is in those systems is actionable, right? So that you don't get all these false positives, because you don't have a lot of people to respond to those areas, right? So that data comes from mainly from the passive network detection side of the house, right? And so we have network taps, sensors that are deployed in these environments. That can be deployed, within air-gapped environments too, if you choose to have an administrative backhaul network to get the data out. And then we look at it through three different sort of lenses. The first one is a policy-based lens, so you can define what you want and expect on your networks, or you can define what you don't want to see on your networks. And through policy, basically say, yeah, this is a violation of our policy, or we do not expect to see this on our policy. So we don't expect this, we want to see communications happen in this way, right? The next sort of a level or lens of that is anomaly based. So like, this device speaks to this device and nobody else. Okay, well, if it starts talking to other devices, that's an anomaly, and we can flag that for you, right? We can say, okay, look, there's something happening here. Or communications protocol baselining, so that there's the baseline looks like this, we see a jump in that baseline, we can alert you that says, hey, something's changed here, right? Or signature based, right? So we have the open source Suricata framework there, and so we have the signatures to detect the common malware families and things like that that are on the network, so we can wrap that together, and that's all in the sort of threat detection environment or area. So the last one that I'll talk about is something that I think is really unique. And as an automation engineer, this to me makes a lot of sense. And people quite often don't understand the value from a security perspective. But we can actually go in, and when we speak these proprietary protocols to the controllers, so if it's a Rockwell controller, you're speaking SIP, and we can actually ask the controller, hey, can you send me a copy of your logic, right? So can you send me a copy of the running configuration inside of your programmable logic controller? We can snapshot that then, and then we can look for changes against that. And so this is actually getting down to what's happening inside that controller at a very granular level. And I'll tell you, we have customers or clients that they have purchased and installed the Tenable OT product line mainly to keep track of all the changes in their environments. And people ask me, they go, well, don't the vendors themselves have these asset management tools? Well, yes, they do. So if you go to Rockwell, they have one. If you go to Siemens, they have one. If you go to Schneider, they have one that they will sell you alongside their devices. And they do a very, very good job of managing their assets. They should, right? They're provided by the OEMs themselves. But many of these environments are very heterogeneous, right? You don't just have one manufacturers of equipment on this network. You have, dozens of manufacturers. And so getting that all into the same database to do some of that correlation there, I think is a challenge, right? And so we see a lot of value. We've seen, for example, customers who have said, "Oh, well, hey, this piece of production equipment has just shut down. What happened?" They go back and they look in the change. They go, "Oh, well, somebody changed the setting on this temperature controller from this to this, and we need to revert back to the pre-existing setting." And so giving them that capability to do that is very important from a production perspective. From a forensics perspective, in regards to information security, it's actually really beneficial to be able to go and look and say, hey, we've had some security anomalies. Were there any changes to the actual devices themselves, right? So that change, again, was it an authorized change, or was this change a result of malware? I mean, if the change is going across the wire, we're going to be able to detect it. And then furthermore, when we load the configuration back from that device, we'll be able to see that it changed between, for example, version 3 and version 4. And how do we make sure that these devices are being managed like that? So very, very useful capability, I think. So with that, that's kind of my introduction, I guess, to this concept that we need to shift away. We need to shift away from installing, the control system as a capital expenditure and leaving it there for 10 or 15 years without touching it. We need to look at it as more of an operational expenditure with the right human capital behind it to maintain it and keep it up to date. And I believe that will be a lower total cost of ownership at the end of the day than trying to, call out the firefighting team when something really bad happens. And I mean, I've seen legacy environments where the manufacturer doesn't even exist anymore, or it's a long obsolete product. I've worked for companies that we bought parts off of eBay, and you had sort of a list of gray market friends that you knew who had similar systems that it's like, hey, do you have this card? I had a fire in Iraq and I lost this card and I need to replace it, and I know you have some. Can I buy it from you? I would suggest that in the long term, that's not an effective way of doing maintenance, right? So being able to control those things and predict those things, I think, is very important. And I believe more so as security challenges continue to rise. And we every single day in the news, we see, either an additional ransomware event or an additional advanced persistent threat event that's been a breach of major companies. We need to do a better job of, quite frankly, instrumenting with sensors, security sensors in these environments, so that we have the visibility and we can understand what baseline is, and we know what the what assets are on our network, so that we can have the right, incident response plan, etc. So that, I believe, is very, very critical. Before we sort of morph over to the Q&A section, I want to talk a little bit about Tenable as a company. So Tenable is a global company in the information security space. Every single security person in the world, probably, including myself, has laid their hands on Nessus, right? So Nessus is a vulnerability management scanning tool in the IT environment. Basically sets the standard, right? So the Tenable products set the standard for how risk-based vulnerability management is done on the information technology side of the house. So a lot of corporations around the world use the Tenable products. And we were asked, quite frankly, by our large global customers, what are you going to do about OT? So a year ago, Tenable purchased a company called Indigi, and that became the Tenable OT product line. And so now we are the first company globally in this space that not only can we manage your enterprise security from a risk-based perspective and tell you, here's all the assets on your networks, here's the vulnerabilities they have, oh, by the way, Marty's computer is running an outdated version of Adobe Acrobat, such and such, and we don't know why it's not updating. You should go look at that. Now we can see into the OT environment. So we have these very customized protocols that we communicate with the programmable logic controllers or the protective relay systems, et cetera, to be able to understand their risk posture. But we also understand that on the OT side of the firewall, you have a lot of Windows computers, right? You have a lot of IT-like equipment. So we've selectively moved some of those capabilities from our enterprise system over there onto the OT side, so you can safely analyze those IT assets, right? And fusing that together, nobody else can do that. The other thing I think is that if you look in the operational technology space, the sort of ICS detection market, most of these companies are startups, right? And Indigi was no different. But now Tenable, which is a global publicly traded company, you're no longer dealing with a startup. So we have global 24/7 support. We have an R&D team that has published more vulnerabilities, more zero-day vulnerabilities than other teams consistently, for a number of years, and that includes OT systems as well. So, very robust and stable company to do business with. So that was what brought me to the Tenable side of things, and I'm very happy to be with them, and I'd be very happy to answer any of your questions. So now we will kind of morph over into the question and answer period, and we just keep going as long as we've got questions coming in.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Marty, and very, very interesting to learn about, how moving away from that run to failure mentality and the various ways to keep the systems in your OT environment fully operational at all times, and how that can really save your utility money in the long run, right? So like Marty said, we'd like to open the session up to questions from our audience at this point. So please use the chat function and type in any questions that you may have. A couple questions to start off, and it's perhaps a two-parter. The notion of cyber maintenance seems pretty basic to any IT or OT environment. So why do you think this concept is not more widely recognized and embraced today? And Marty, a part B to that, so what percentage of utilities would you estimate have the type of proactive and predictive cybersecurity view that you've presented today?
Yeah, so the first one, I really don't know why people don't take a more proactive approach. It seems to me that um, I think the security industry as a whole has done kind of a disservice in that we kind of go out and say, oh, buy this blinky box and stick it on your network, and all your troubles will be over. Well, that it couldn't be farther from the truth, right? There's no blinky box that's going to solve all your security problems. You have to have the three things I talked about. It's people, process, and technology. And I intentionally put technology last, right? Even as a technology vendor, our solution isn't going to give you that much value unless you have the people in place to leverage that data and installation. And that's kind of why I talk about it in terms of maintenance, because companies understand you buy $1 million piece of machinery, a turbine, worth many millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. Well, you have specialists that you hire just to maintain that machine, right? Or you have contracts with third parties that have that expertise that are in place from day one. And I don't think people don't really get that they need to do that in these network computerized, industrial control system sort of operational technology environments. They take the same level of care and feeding. You can stick the system in and run it to failure, but you're going to be scrambling at the last minute to try to find the resources and the parts and the expertise to be able to bring it back together. And I think that that just continues to compound itself in the security world. So I definitely kind of think that this is it is a rather simple concept, but I think that it helps people understand how to pitch it to management, right? It's because people go, well, I don't know how to sell the how to buy a security installation to my management to get the funding approved. And I think when you start comparing it to people putting oil and grease into the machine, then the senior leaders go, oh yeah, well, we have to do that. I mean, so you've got to put the cyber grease in, right? And it's definitely a concept I think that needs some attention. And then from an estimate of how many percent, it depends. So I would say that in the NERC compliant environments where you're bound by regulation to do things, yeah, it's a higher percentage that have, some capabilities in place to be able to do that. But in general, it's pretty low. I mean, most of the people that I talk to on the enterprise side, it's mature. It's very mature. I mean, we have, a new vulnerability comes out and the plugin is released the same day, and within 24 hours, people are scanning their networks and prioritizing which assets they're going to go and address that vulnerability in, and they have graphs and charts that say, mean time to closure of that vulnerability on the enterprise side. And we understand that it's different, right? Maintenance cycles and the testing and the regression testing and everything on the OT side is much, much different. But I maintain that even if you can't address or fix or patch the vulnerability in your programmable logic controller, in 2 days or in a week or in 2 months, and you have to wait 6 months for an outage, it's better that you know that exists. It's better that you can characterize that as a risk. It's better that you can explain that to your boss and your boss's boss and eventually the board of directors of your company when they say, oh, we read about this thing called, amnesia or Ripple 20 or, any of these types of vulnerability suites or families that come out. And we can say, oh yes, 80% of our environment has been mitigated, but we have 20% that isn't, and we have to wait till the next turnaround to do that. We believe the risk is low because there's no publicly available exploit. You need to have the message, you need to have that story together, and you're not going to be able to do that unless you get this kind of continuous system in place.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that answer. So next question we have, if an OT environment has legacy equipment that can easily be over 10 years old, why is a constant updated inventory necessary? Do things change so much?
I'll say it depends. So I am very familiar with legacy equipment. I used some of the examples of the eBay and the gray market stuff. So I have worked with 30-year-old equipment, right? That it's a much different technology set. You know, hard drives the size of small washing machines that still are running in some locations. You know, 10 megabit hard drives that weigh 300 pounds. And when you've got a 10 meg hard drive that weighs 300 pounds, you know, an SSD that's like 10 terabytes is it's a big difference. I believe that even in those legacy environments, there are changes, right? There's going to be exceptions. There's going to be exceptions where nothing has been touched at all for 10 years. But in most of the environments, the value of the data is so high that they've put in a server on that network that is pulling the data out of these legacy machines with a protocol like OPC or some other, you know, protocol to pull the data out and serve it up to the business side. Those conduits into those systems introduce additional risk, and you should understand, you know, what's on both sides of the firewall, right? What does my IT environment look like? You know, no board of directors is going to allow you to not be instrumenting your IT corporate environment, you know, for information security stuff. That's a requirement in today's business world. In fact, the insurance carriers are now coming in and doing sort of cybersecurity assessments, and they go, you have to have a certain level of maturity before we'll even insure you. And then, oh, by the way, your premiums are going to come down as you increase your cybersecurity maturity, right? So I don't think that is very long before we'll see that in operational technology environments. So they'll come in, they'll go, oh, your control system is 20 plus years old, it's full of holes, and it's completely interconnected with your business environment. Yeah, we're not insuring you for loss. So if that thing shuts off, yeah, you're on your own. So I think that there are some real compelling reasons, and a lot of I think that you should take a really hard look in the mirror. If you believe your environment is not changing, nobody touches it. No instrument mechanic or electrician or anybody is ever connecting a laptop to it through a serial port or programming it anyway or rebooting it in any way or turning the keys from program to run mode, etc. If you really believe that those kinds of changes do not happen in your environment, I think you're fooling yourself. You should really take a hard look at that environment, and you'll find that somebody's come in and stuck an LTE, you know, cell modem on the system to pull the data out and send it to a corporate office somewhere, or there's a DSL line that a vendor attached to the system because they needed to do maintenance on it, or there's a old dial-up phone line attached. I mean, there's some scary stuff still out there.
For sure. Thank you. We've got another question come in. How do you recommend to best monitor and manage non-technical security risks such as the human factor?
I think that a lot of those come through policy and training. I'm a big advocate of making sure that you have information security training for everybody in an organization. It should be customized by role or job. And I mean, everybody hates kind of taking the phishing training every year. And yes, even I fail the phishing training sometimes. You know, when they send out the link that's, you know, the best one was when I was in the federal government, and, you know, literally they timed the thing so it was the day that we were all due to have to take some sort of refresher training for security reasons or something, and this little email comes in and says, oh yeah, you're delinquent in your training, click here to, you know, to take it. And it's like, oh yeah, I got to do that, click, boom, oh. So, you know, keeping people you know, well advised of what the risks are, and having policies in place, right? So you can't enforce security violations or encourage good security behavior unless you do actually have those policies in place that you can point back to. Then, you know, having the technology such as Tenable OT in there to give those people that are doing those security jobs the right data to analyze and to monitor and understand the day-to-day challenges in their systems, I think is paramount. But the individual asking the question is absolutely right. You got to get the human factors, the right people in place, and a big one, and I've seen this, and I've actually seen it in the electrical industry, not in Canada, thankfully, but in the electrical industry. I talked about these phishing exercises, right? And so a company will do a test email to all employees, and they'll say, people will click on the link, right? And they'll fail. I've actually seen companies, draconian companies, say that if you fail that test 3 times, you're fired. First time, remedial training. Second time, remedial training and write up in your file. Third time, you're going to be let go. That's completely draconian. If you look at how we handle safety incidents in industrial sectors, people, that if you spot a near miss, it's like, oh, I see a hazard here. There's a live electrical circuit here, or there's a gate that wasn't locked or left open, or there's some sort of spill that needs to be cleaned up. You report that in a no fault way, right? You report that. It gets analyzed. It quite frankly gets celebrated a lot of times. That it's like, hey, this is a good pat on the back. Thank you for pointing this out. How do we prevent this from happening in the future to make it a more safe environment for everybody? We have to get like that in security too, right? I mean, we all make security mistakes. So how do we spot those weaknesses, celebrate the fact that we found it, we're addressing it rather than punishing somebody? So I hope nobody works for companies that punish people for making mistakes. We're all humans. We all make mistakes.
Thanks. There's some great questions coming in. So I'll fire with the next one. Is there a rule of thumb pricing to help give utilities an estimate of what it would cost to implement a unified risk-based view of IT and OT?
I really can't give a sort of ballpark or generic pricing. It depends so much on your infrastructure. Is it legacy? Is it modern? How many sites do you have that need separate equipment just because of the way your networks are laid out? We would be happy to run through that exercise with anybody, with our partners here. So, if anybody's interested in understanding what that would look like for their environment, just let us know, and we're happy to give you a demo and sketch out some pricing for you so that you can get that understanding and also help you with the business justification, right? Why is this a good investment for your company, and why it's probably overdue.
Great, thank you. Do you see any employee pushback, such as, is this taking my job? Any fear of that?
No, not really. I mean, I think in the security space, it's almost always the opposite, right? The biggest pushback I would have is that, as an automation professional, as an OT person, as the maintenance or electrical engineer or something like that, they're quite often getting saddled with this security work, right? So it's not a is this taking my job? It's oh yeah, this is an extra thing I have to do now. And it gets deprioritized. And so, for anybody that's here in the C-suite on this call, make sure you prioritize the hiring and the personnel to maintain these systems. That's one of the key undertones in this entire presentation, is that this really is a human problem, right? We need to make sure we have the right people in place to operate and maintain this technology.
Great. Is this a big bang solution, or can implementation be done in steps?
Definitely in steps. In fact, that would be how we would propose doing it. A lot of our customers will put in a pilot or a proof of value, proof of concept type of installation. If you already have an enterprise tenable installation, then it makes it easier, right? Because you've already got the big mothership we can push the OT data up into for analysis on the information security side. But it can definitely go as as small or as large as you want, right? And so we're willing to work with you in a phased approach. pick the environments if you have lab or test environments, or hey, I want to do this on the generation side before I move to transmission, or we can work with you to deploy it in the best way possible. Very scalable, both from the hardware or sort of systems support side. The licensing side is also very scalable, so we can right size it for whatever your project intentions are, right?
Excellent. Have you seen any situations where a utility has been able to capitalize this OM&A expense solution?
I think part of it would be CapEx, right? So you can, if there's network changes, hardware, and servers, that kind of stuff that you're going to have to spin up and buy, that part can be capitalized. But first, at the end of the day, this is a subscription-based software license, right? So the cost for you year to year is going to be, I have 10,000 assets on these networks that I'm monitoring, so there's a price per year for that license. So I believe that most companies that would be on the OpEx side of the books, but there certainly probably is some capital expenditure up front to get the implementation ready. But that depends on how each company and what geographical area they're in, how they prefer to do their accounting.
Excellent. We're running close to time, but I think we have time for a couple more. Does the subscription just cover monitoring or patch reviews as well?
So we do not take an active mitigation stance on your network. So we're not in the business of pushing out the patch or phasing the deployment of the patch. We are looking at what Tenable does is we want to give you the best and most clear information about the state of your assets. So what is deployed in your environment, and then give you that information so that you can make the decisions about what do I need to patch and when. We do have third-party integrations with organizations such as ServiceNow, so you can use their capabilities to do the workflow, do the tickets that you will dispatch the people out to the field to actually deploy the firmware, and then it'll come back in and get cross-checked with whether or not the firmware's actually been upgraded or not. So we have some very tight workflow integrations with those sorts of organizations, and I think that's where you would tie that in. But we're in the data gathering mode, so we're in the monitoring and collection end of that workflow.
Perfect. So we'll cap off with a last quick question. What future technology developments do you think are just over the horizon for OT environments, and how does this get incorporated into the cyber maintenance approach you outlined today?
Yeah, it's a great closing question. I think that the biggest change that we'll continue to see in these environments is adoption of cloud technologies. So that doesn't mean your PLC is going to be running in the cloud, probably in anytime soon. But if you're running these kinds of maintenance programs on large rotating machinery like a turbine, or if you're doing some sort of data analysis, most of the time that data is getting pulled out of your facility and pushed up to a cloud-based extension that vendor or that analyst is using, right? So, we're Tenable on the IT side of the house certainly offers products that can scan cloud-based environments, which we've seen an uptick in with all the work from home in 2020. And so I believe you're going to see continued investment even on the OT side of the house in how do we span these environments where we've got on-premises equipment, so there's a server rack sitting here, but that server rack, connects to real devices in the plant, okay? So we have to have that on-premises and device level look, but it also connects to a bunch of corporate cloud-based information or other systems. And we have to be able to span, quite frankly, that whole supply chain, right? So we have to have the capabilities to look into all those systems, and you'll see that continue.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys, and to our audience today as well for those great questions, and Marty and Vid for your presentation. That brings today's session to a close. Before we go, mark your calendars. We do have more conversation webinars taking place. Tomorrow, December 10th, Itron will speak to leveraging a multi-purpose network to enable digital utilities and smart cities. On Tuesday, December 15th, will be our final conversation series webinar, and PwC Canada will have a panel discussion on cybersecurity and understanding an OT attack. Again, all of CEA's futures events and webinars can be found in our monthly newsletter, Current Affairs, or you can go to the news and events section of our website at electricity.ca. And in closing, I would once again like to thank ComplyTech, Vid, Marty, and each of you for joining us today. This concludes today's webinar, and we'll talk to you again next time. Bye for now.
Take care.